Welcome to the Woman's Current. Is the Tide Turning? I'm Sylvia Beckerman.
And I'm Molly Wadzeck. Together we're exploring how women support women across generations, experiences, and perspectives.
From baby boomers to millennials and beyond, we're asking, are we lifting each other up? And how do we keep the tide moving forward?
Each week we'll dive into real conversations with women who are reshaping the currents and reflect on what those stories mean for all of us.
So let's dive in, let's get started.
The first line is for every girl in every town who ever thought, what else? And, that's the very first page of the book. And that notion of like, you've been given this life, but what if you want to think beyond it? What if you want to ask that question of what else is there than what's right here?
Welcome to the Woman's Current. Is the Tide Turning? I'm Sylvia Beckerman. Normally I'm joined by my millennial co-host, Molly Wadzeck. Molly can't be with us for this conversation, but she'll be reflecting on it afterwards, adding her perspective to what we explore today. My guest is acclaimed photographer and filmmaker Jona Frank, whose work often captures coming of age, identity, and family through a cinematic and deeply personal lens. Jona's work has always explored identity and family, and I was eager to have her join me again, this time to talk about those stories that evolve across generations. Her most recent book, Cherry Hill, is part photographic memoir, part stage portrait, a visual retelling of her mother's life as a 1950s housewife and the generational shift that followed. Through it, Jona explores what it means to grow up under the weight of expectations and how women's definitions of self, success, and freedom have changed, but not always enough. It's a story about mothers and daughters, rebellion and understanding, and what happens when women begin to rewrite the stories they were handed. Jona, welcome. Let's start the conversation.
Okay, let's go. Thank you so much for having me again, Sylvia.
This is going to be great. Jona, what led you to tell your mother's story in this way through photographs and staged scenes? And was this always going to be about your mother, or did it become about both of you as you created it?
That's a good question. One thing that kind of opened the door for it was that I had done this project in England, in Liverpool, and it was all about boxers. And it's the book that was published prior to Cherry Hill called The Modern Kids. And it's a series of portraits of young boxers in the north of England. And I was doing this project and staying in this suburb of Liverpool, and with a friend there, and going back and forth to this gym and into Liverpool and into this more urban community from this suburban community. And then when I would come back to Santa Monica, where I live, and I'd be flying back on the plane, I had all these notes in my notebooks about Cherry Hill, about New Jersey. And when I was putting the book together, I kept looking at these notes and thinking, why was I writing about Cherry Hill? And so I was completing it, I was really sitting down and trying to read these notes and think about it. And I realized that there was something about the proximity of where I was staying and where one of the gyms was, and Liverpool, and just the area that really reminded me of my suburban youth. And there was this strange thing that was happening there, that everywhere I went, there was 80s music, and it was just putting me back in the 80s. And I kept thinking, like, one afternoon I had to do this thing for something I was shooting at a Staples in Liverpool. And there was blaring 80s music. And I remember there were like 2 employees working, and the music was so loud. It was basically a dance party, and they were embarrassed. And I was like, no, I don't mind, because nobody was in the store. And I think they thought they were going to get in trouble. But all of this was just sort of swimming around in my head and kept bringing me back to my youth. And I was making these notes about it. And I think, in that way that you tell stories about your life with your friends and share parts of yourself, that people would make jokes with me about, you should write these stories about your mom. And then I started to really look at what I was writing and think, how could I take these stories and visualize them? How could I, show what really exists only in my head, in my memory, and begin to kind of create tangible images of these memories. And then I started thinking about it and thinking, if I write stories and illustrate it with photographs and I work with actors, it's in a sense doing what I've done with all my previous work in looking at identity and telling coming of age stories, how we find what we love or discover what we love, but kind of turning it on its side and doing it about my life. And so, it was a lot of conversation, and it was a lot of looking at my own notebooks and really thinking, how do I create images? How do I fictionalize or fiction? I shouldn't say fictionalize, because it's not meant to be fiction. Because it's all based on my life. But in a sense, because I am creating sets and working with actors, there feels like there's a fiction aspect to it. So maybe it's like maybe the images are really an auto-fiction in a sense. But the essays are all, stories from my life. And so then I started thinking about, that one had to work off of the other. And it's interesting because once the book came out, like one of the first people I spoke with in a press manner was someone from the New York Times, Arthur LeBow. And he writes about photography for the Times. And he wrote about how there is an equality between the photographs and the words, that they work together, that they are, and one does not dominate the other. And I really appreciated that, because I wrote, the essays were painstaking and took so much time, and they really pushed me into into a lane that I was not comfortable in. I mean, it took me way out of my comfort lane to really be writing essays. And I did work with a writing coach who is another person you've interviewed, Cole Kasdan, who's incredible. And she really helped me focus my writing and made me feel much stronger about my ability to write. But so I mean, and it wasn't something that I had a lot of there weren't a lot of blueprints with. Like, I mean, I feel like the book itself. Again, Arthur LeBow, he said this great thing after he saw the book. He said the book is an object to art, and I loved that so much, because he said as soon as I held it in my hands, I knew it was something. And there is something about just the object of the book that feels creative and weighted to me. And then inside, there are illustrations and there are photographs and there are these essays, and they are creating this world of my childhood.
And they definitely are. And the photographs are amazing because they depict exactly, if no one has lived through the 50s and no one has, but has maybe seen pictures, it takes you right back and it puts you there. And the essays just, I mean, it just flows. But I think those photographs just really put you in the place so that when you read the essay, you connect. And for those who have not read or picked up a copy of Cherry Hill, what we're describing is like a scene out of a 50s TV show that is your life, and not Leave It to Beaver or Father Knows Best and June Cleaver. Yet you could put your mother in June Cleaver, which is a totally another generation. And that is what brings me to you and my next question. Your mother represents a generation of women who were taught to find identity through marriage and motherhood. So, how much of that world still lingers today? And in writing this, what did you discover about your mother's sense of self?
It's so interesting because when I was thinking about doing this, I looked back at some of the press that came out, when the book first came out. But I have a book of things that people have written to me about Cherry Hill. And which is, that was so unexpected. And in fact, my editor will say to me, we've never had an artist who has received so much mail from a project. Like we've not had this kind of a response. And what was so interesting was that it wasn't just people of like my age, people that, who grew up in the 80s and could relate to it. It was people of my mother's generation. And that was a total surprise to me. And they wrote to me and said, we didn't have choices. What was laid out in front of us, the world that we were presented with was, you should get married, you should have a child. That is your place. That is what you can offer to society, and that's the world that you should, desire. And I think that message was so sent to my mother, as it was these other women, and they wrote to me to say, your mom didn't have options.
There weren't options back. There weren't, there was no, the only news you got was the news. You got, the papers. You grew, my mother's, I was born in the 50s, and my mother got married, had 5 children. Her place was in the home. And so there weren't any other models for her to look at. But my mother was a very, very strong individual who, my father, again, he was from the 50s. So therefore his place was to take care of the family. He didn't want my mother going to school before and there were 5 of us before we were out of the house, or all in school full time. So at the age of 42, and this will be repetitive to anyone who listens to most of the podcast, she somehow had the chutzpah and the will to do something that she had never been allowed to do before, and that was go to college. Growing up, they didn't have the money. So at 42, she went to college. Within 8 years, she had her PhD.
Wow.
So she was someone who was outside of that. Your mother and most of that generation did not. I mean, in the 50s, you had Leave It to Beaver, you had June Cleaver, you had the pearls, you had the dress, you had the heels, and the apron. The apron so you could cook, so you could take out the vacuum cleaner and vacuum. I mean,
but I do think that, I think that one of the things I really cover and talk about in Cherry Hill is my mother was depressive. And that was not dealt with. It wasn't as if, we were going to go to therapy and we were going to talk about this and we were going to, she was going to try to get help. But it is very hard to not look at that and not think, of course, part of that came out with the fact, from the fact that she didn't have a bigger life. And I think she wanted a bigger life. I think she wanted something where she was rewarded, in a way that motherhood was not rewarding to her, that she felt purposeful, that she felt like she was making an impact. And she was smart, I think that she wanted to feel like I'm good at what I do. That is outside of the family, that is my own. And that was not something that she had. And I do think what were those dreams? What were those things that you imagined that you wanted for your own life? And that really presented itself to me after the book came out and after people were responding to it, to think, I don't know the answers to that.
That, unfortunately, back then, women didn't know they had a choice. and their dreams were usually not expressed. I don't even know if they expressed it over a cup of tea or the wine afterwards with their friends, because most of their friends were friends from the suburbs. It wasn't that, because that was the other thing. They were supposed to get married, move to the suburbs, raise a family, and disassociate themselves from anyone who was not married. So their whole clique was that group. And unless they had been exposed to something else, yeah, how did they know that it was safe to, even if they did dream, to then express that?
Well, there's also something really interesting that I also feel like you're not, especially in the 50s and at that time, there wasn't value placed on what you were doing at the home. I mean, the idea was, taking care of the home was what you needed to do. Like, if you're going to have children and you're going to have the husband and he's off going to the city, making the money and working hard, you need to take care of him. You need to like boost him and prepare him for that day, every day that he has to go in and deal with the concrete jungle. But it's not as if people noticed that skill. And it's interesting because I was just reading about this book, this is somebody who I think really fits everything that you want to do with the direction of the podcast. And I was reading it over the weekend and I was like, I have to tell Sylvia this. There's this book called Having It All by this woman who is an economist who studies gender economy. And in one of the I think this was a Substack that I read, because I read a few things. She talks about how what happens within the household and the marriage is a public good. That you are taking care of these things, but you are not rewarded. And that what your husband is doing and how he's building a resume and a career and working up this, the corporate ladder is a private good. And that whatever happens in your life, he can take that with him and he can continue to climb that ladder because he's had his years of experience haven't been interrupted by having a child and by getting married. But a woman's life is interrupted. And I think in a way it's interesting because it's almost hard to say, I really want that. Like today, I think it's harder to say, I want to have that child and I want to get married and I want to share this life with somebody, because you have to, you can't stop your pursuit. I think that you still need to keep your private ladder going as a woman. And that's a huge challenge. I think it's very confusing.
It is very confusing. I've been around several young people, and I can use my son and daughter-in-law as an example. They both work full-time. There's now 2 grandsons, 4 months and 3 and almost 4 years.
Congratulations. That's exciting.
What I see, the difference that I see in them is that there is no separation of you do this, you do that. It's a true partnership. If this needs to be done and someone's there, it's being done. It's not a question, oh, your job is taking out the trash and your job is this. I can't do this. Oh, this is this. I'm taking him to the party. Did you buy the present? That, I am happy to say, does not exist. It's a true partnership, which is, it's not as rare as we think. Mm-hmm. Because there's all this, fair play and whatever. And again, instead of talking amongst everyone, there's all these separate talks. And that's one of the things that doing this, it's intergenerational. We need to communicate. We need to find out what are younger people thinking. I grew up and I'm a baby boomer. So be it, okay. And, I know what the fight was during the 70s, that it was, yes, 50 years ago, but in reality, it's not, time goes like that. all the things that women stood up for, and I don't care, call it feminism, call it whatever you want, but the support that women had for each other in getting women's rights and being able to get a credit card and being able to do mortgage. I mean, these are things, have we communicated? Has my generation communicated enough to the younger generations and then the millennials, and then you have younger people, that these things were fought for? They weren't always there.
Right. No, I mean, and it's so interesting because I don't even know if I understand the whole trad wife world. Like I haven't looked into that enough to really understand it. I mean,
Just another name for
just the
a
name of it,
woman.
is turns me off. But the thing is though, is that if that is your choice, you don't, I'm like, you're not understanding that choice comes on the shoulders of all of those women who were able to make choices. That the insanity that you would need a husband to sign something to get a credit card.
It
That
wasn't even just a husband. If your son was 18 years old, they could co-sign because it needed a male co-signer, an adult. And at 18, they were considered an adult.
No, I mean, and I think that is what is so worrisome to me day to day when I think about things like the Trump administration putting out a list of words that should be removed from documents, and that one of those words is women, and that all of those things that to be included as a female was something that had to be fought for, and to not think of how large that is, the just the enormity of things like take out the word woman, or the notion of like using the word woman is woke, that just being recognized as the entire gender is something that had to be fought for, that had to the Ms. magazines and the impact of all of that we all carry with us. And I think at some point, I know in my own life, I felt like I was taking that for granted. I was feeling like we're on our way, we're doing really well, and in the last few years, I don't feel that way. I feel like women are really being overlooked, and they're not being valued, and their contribution and their intellect is not being valued. And I do think that it's what's so important about things like this podcast and things like Cherry Hill and telling those stories. I mean, I made that book, and every time I've worked with an editor or worked with a publisher, they have said to me, "Who is this book for?" And when I got the question, and when I was like pitching Cherry Hill, I said it's for every 16-year-old in the world. Every 16-year-old girl in the world. And, because the first line is for every girl in every town who ever thought, what else? And, that's the very first page of the book. And that notion of like, you've been given this life, but what if you want to think beyond it? What if you want to ask that question of what else is there than what's right here? And, how do I create my own life? And I just feel like I thought when I put it out there, and when people would talk to me about the book, I mean, even things like this, I would think, God, it's such a weird, small story about this, like, literally, the story is about a suburban childhood. And it's not about a sexual assault. It's not about, like, some, like, my overcoming addiction. It's not, it's what I feel like I've seen so many memoirs about. It is really this very simple story of growing up in this town and saying, everybody is supposed to conform to a certain standard and be a certain way. And I'm told over and over that I don't fit that standard. I'm not feminine enough. I'm not, I like to wear pants and not dresses. And I don't have anything against dresses. Sometimes I'm happy to wear a dress, but I want to make my choices about how I do these things.
Exactly.
And that was a problem. And, and all of that was something I wanted to escape from, and I wanted to get away from. And so when I think, like, the reaction to the book and to people thanking me for the book, and saying things like, when will you write more? I want to read more about your life, and thinking like, oh my gosh, I have this voice. That's been completely amazing. And
yes, and that to me is so important, that we realize we do have a voice and we don't have to agree with everyone. But guess what? We have a voice, we can use it, and this book that you thought was just this little book about you, look what it's done.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, then that's amazing. I mean, it's amazing to sort of revisit it, years later, and look at it and think it really has had an impact on people. And that, I mean, I still get notes about it. It's like, I'll still get like an email about it, and somebody will say, I just discovered it, and that part that you wrote about, it's, and that's incredibly moving to me, because it does truly make me feel like you have to work on telling your story. And you may feel like that is a really small story. And you may think that it's not going to appeal to a lot of people, but you don't know what you have when you're doing it. Like, that's kind of the beautiful thing about completing something and putting it out into the world and saying, tell me what you think of it, or experience this project. Because what you get back is unexpected. And the thing is that you may tell a story that is not for every person in the world, but you're going to find that group, those people who do connect to it, and I think that is what's so crazy for me. I mean, the people who are in their 70s who have written to me and said,
I haven't written to you, I've talked to you about
yeah,
it.
but I just mean, like, that was it was so unexpected. To write and say, it was really hard to be at that point, and it was hard to be, who really connected to my mother. And I was like, no, this story is my mother. Like, I mean, about me. Why are you connected to her? But who connected to my mother and said, we didn't know where to go. We didn't know how to get stuff started, and and we didn't have the voice or the push for people to encourage us. And also that thing of, this is another thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, because I've been writing this novel, that too many women couldn't share what they felt with other women. That it was too closed. So if everything looked okay in that Revolutionary Road way of, all the houses were the same, and people couldn't break that barrier of what was really going on inside, you couldn't really have the conversation to say, what, this is boring every day. I don't like doing this.
But it would take a lot for somebody to be able to say that. It would just take one person to say it to start the ball rolling. But you needed that one person to say it.
Right. And I mean, so tell me about that. Like, what do you think, why do you think that women were so reluctant to have the conversations with other women? I mean, because I know now, I mean, if you want to talk, like, I could not get through day to day without my women friends. I mean, I have incredible female friends.
I think they had female friends. They had the friends that were in that community. And within that community, it would take somebody with a lot of, I'm going to use the word again, chutzpah, and that real strong, to be able to say, this really sucks, I'm bored. But who's going to be that first one to do it? Yes, in some places you might have had that one person, and then you either had people going, oh, no, and they were too afraid to talk about it, or, oh, yes, wow, I feel the same way. I mean, and that's kind of what I discovered when I started out doing A Prey Divorce back in, I don't know, 2016 or something, that these little things that we think are so small that they're too they're too minute to really talk about. People have larger problems. I'm not going to say anything. Well, guess what? That little thing, if you actually say it, probably means so much to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have something that, you know what? You didn't even realize. Oh, there's a way for me to do, oh, we can talk. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk. But it takes that one person to be able to open up and say, you know what? We got to stop doing this. I'm bored. Isn't there anything else to do? Again, when you're in such a tight-knit community, you have to really have that strong self-confidence to say, enough of this, enough. And it just wasn't something that was done a lot. That's why you see so many women now all of a sudden realizing that they can express themselves. And it's not, you still have people who are, they're just, maybe it's not, I won't call it a rut because it's the life they're used to. And they don't want to change it. They're happy in whatever place they've made. They don't want anything to come in and change that. But you have a lot of people who are talking, and this is what I'm talking about, is women supporting women. Are we standing up for one another the way we used to? Are we supporting one another? Are we talking? Is there communication? And communication is key. We all have a voice, and we have to know how to use it, and and really be able to share our stories. And they are stories.
Yeah.
Not every story is going to turn into a book, but they're stories that, hey, isn't that great to be told? But I have one question for you. Well, I have more than one, but I have a question. So did making this project, did it bring understanding, forgiveness, or did it just put in more questions?
Well, I mean, I think it helped me. It gave so many parts of my life context. I mean, it helped me to understand decisions I made, decisions my mother made, why things that were the way they were. And so I think that I mean, in a sense, I guess it did make me feel more forgiving of her. But it also made me feel a sadness that, that she couldn't explore more, that she lived her life in this, in a small town and without believing that she could be confident to explore the world in a bigger way. My mom, when the book came out, it was a couple months after my father had died, and she was not in a great state of mind and in the early stages of dementia, and I felt like her trying to get her to understand the book would have been very difficult. So I didn't put that on her. I didn't ask her to do that. And I feel like there's a way that there wasn't an understanding that she could have given me that would have said, this is why I did what I did. This is why I, wanted you to be this perfect child, or it was so important to me that you wore your hair a certain way, or you dressed a certain way. I mean, that the feelings that hurt me as a child, that made me feel very vulnerable and really took away confidence, to sort of go out in the world and just be myself. They felt childish, at the time, like, as an adult, to kind of go back and say, like, all of that stuff, you carry it with you throughout your life, and it formed who I was. And sometimes I had to really overcome difficult, what felt difficult. It's very funny because one of the things people responded to was that I talk about how obsessed she was with my hair. And I still get comments upon, I mean, like that is one of the funniest things of, like, what was it about parents who, like, if you were born in the 60s, why were our parents so obsessed with our hair? Like, other women talking about that, which I was like, I love how universal that is. The mother and hairstyle, and just the comment upon all of that. But shortly after the book came out and we were talking about it, my mother said something to me about how she knew that when I was growing up that she had funny ways. And she said, I've really worked to try to be better about my funny ways. And I remember feeling like I wanted to scream. And she said, and your daddy, which she always said daddy, which drove me crazy, was very patient about my funny ways. And he loved me despite my funny ways. And I thought, wow, so you're gonna, like, this years of depression, years of the closed door, years of coming to dinner in your bathrobe and the whole thing, we're gonna just chalk that up to funny ways and say, well, we're gonna just keep that over there and everything, we don't need to talk about it more. But I also realized that in a way, what really mattered to her was my father, was not how it affected me, because I don't think she understood. Like, I feel like, do parents today understand that everything you do, your children are absorbing it, and they're observing it. That they're seeing what you are doing. They're seeing how the two of you interact. It is an example. For them, you are the TV show.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. And so all of that, it's imprinting. And I think that was the thing. At that point, when she said it to me, I was like, the imprint is too strong. Like, I'm a fully formed adult. I've written this book about our relationship. Like, I'm not doing it to say I want to hold on to this because it's like, it's what I need to do and it's my existence. I'm doing it because it's such an integral part of who I am that, that it's just, it is my day to day. And I think that is actually a thing that parents just didn't take that in. They didn't think, I've talked to friends who would say to me, I would just do stuff. My mother wouldn't notice me all day. I could be anywhere in the neighborhood, and she, it was really that world of just be home by 6 o'clock or whatever. And that, just the trouble that they got into. And I didn't have that. I had to report in and explain myself every day.
I used to go downstairs on my way to school and use her makeup. And I'd walk into the bathroom, downstairs before I went upstairs. But my mother always knew you had makeup on. Oh yeah, I couldn't get away with anything.
That's funny.
Again, it's communication. It's communication. Yeah. And how does a parent communicate to their child? How do women communicate to one another? How do we talk to different generations? And, the other thing, you and your mother, as you've said, you came of age in two very, very different worlds. When you look at younger generations of women today, what do you see? More freedom or just new forms of pressure?
Oh, that's an interesting question. In a sense, I feel like you see both. I think that there is more freedom because there are more avenues to have your voice be heard. And there are more avenues to reach out to friends. And I think, in just the whole notion of texting and being able to have the support of, I'm having a hard day, or this is not what I thought it would be. And, and getting a text back from a friend who can say, what, you can do this, or you got this, or it's going to be okay. And just that sense of connection is much greater. So I think that is very positive. But I think there's an ugly, ugly pressure to perfection and to sort of make it look like, your world is in order. That's the thing that drives me crazy about Instagram. And just the sort of the whole thing of, you want to redo that room? Well, look at this, in 3 minutes, it's all beautiful and it's all better. And I've got a beautiful baby room and I've got this beautiful world that I live in that is perfect. And there is this aspirational quality that is fake, that's just so fake. And I think you have to really remember that and remind yourself of it at times, that to say, day to day, you need connection, and you have to you can't compare. And I think there's a lot of comparison, and that's very dangerous.
I so agree, because there are more forms of freedom, but I think the amount of pressure that people put on themselves, that again, society has come together in a variety of different groups that call themselves a variety of different names, and it gets so confusing at times, that where do you go? Who are you really supposed to be? You have to really be strong within yourself in order to be able to kind of, knock away, have that Wonder Woman bracelet and knock away the bad forces that are coming at you, the ones that are not real.
Right, right.
So, do you think women today are aware of how much they've inherited from the women before?
I think if you have a parent or a mother or a mentor or someone who you really can be open with and honest with, and can break down what you're going after, what you want out of life, what your goals are, who can help you focus them and do that in a supportive and positive way. Wait, tell me this. Tell me that question again. Like there's something specific. Because
do you think women today are aware of how much they've inherited from the women before? I know I'm in a different generation than you are.
no. I really don't. I don't think that they, so I'm saying, like, I'm thinking of like young women that I know personally that are like, I have one son that are either friends with my son or children of good friends of mine. I think they have a sense of real connection with people, and I think what you look for, like, the guidance that you look for, if you can ask for it. But I don't think, on a bigger picture, if I think about what I read in the New York Times on a regular basis, or what I am taking in, just culturally, what I'm, that women really have a sense of their own history, that the larger history of, how much they didn't have, how much they did not have access to, and that it's so assumed. That it's so assumed that the what they can do whatever they want, in a sense. I don't think they even really understand that we are still fighting for things like, income equality, that men are still being given more money for the same job, like that is still going on, which blows my mind. I don't think that young women understand that.
Well, to me, my generation, I don't believe. This is my feeling about it, is that we've come to a point now where it's almost a realization that we did not communicate the fight that, what was fought for, what we actually have. It's like going and playing in a game and winning a trophy and whatnot. You have those trophies up there. Well, what we fought for, equal rights, voting, abortion, getting a mortgage and whatnot, those are not trophies that are on somebody's wall. It's just a part of history. And did we fall down in not giving that legacy and really telling the story and continuing to tell the story? Because we are now at a point in time where we're going to be fighting to keep what was fought for 50 years ago, but the younger generation has no idea that it was fought for, that it
Right.
didn't exist.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is one of the scariest things. And that education and that communication needs to be put out there now. We don't have time to lose on this. And that's why I think having conversations with you and what you've done, and using your story, using the photography, using the essays, and putting that all together and reaching people who you didn't think you'd reach. You thought it would be the 16-year-old. Well, it's the baby boomers, and it's everyone in between. Because guess what? The baby boomers didn't realize that, a lot of the women didn't realize that they had a choice. And the younger ones didn't realize that people like your mother didn't have a choice or thought they didn't have a choice. They were living in this void where that was it. It's like being put in, I don't know, I can't think of the word right now, but you have no way out.
Right.
And that's exactly what they thought. They had no way out. So,
Well, I mean, and I also think that the women that we read about are the trailblazers. That they're so you feel like, well, those women were doing it, and that and the idea that they were so few and far between.
so, and the histories that are coming out are liable to be lost if we take the word woman out of any historical document ever. Because, we have movies like Hidden Figures, the true story of three women who helped launch Neil Armstrong, and the women behind medicine and the women behind, you even take somebody like Coco Chanel, who
Absolutely.
decided that why should men be the only one comfortable in pants? Why did we have to freeze our butts off? It's that type of thing that we didn't go into Manhattan in pants. You didn't wear pants to school. And this was public school. We're not talking private school with uniforms.
No,
Yeah.
That is it's so interesting. I almost feel like I have worked on and off on this project about female firsts. And unfortunately, it was like I was working on it when we thought Hillary was going to be elected. And then revisited it when we thought Kamala was going to be elected. But these are women who've done these remarkable things, I wish I had my list of everybody, because I won't remember them. But like the first woman to run for president was in the late 1800s.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's a crazy list of these people who were just literal trailblazers. But I love the idea of the things like that. Of it was not acceptable to wear pants.
Nope.
Just a fact like that, like of creating something. Like I feel like there's a project in that of creating something with these kind of statistics of like it wasn't until X year that women could not get a credit card. Because those are the things that need to be highlighted.
And those are the things that I think at least my generation, and my generation can sit here and yell at me. I really don't care. I don't think, I think we fell down in really telling the story. And again, it's the story. What did we do? And I know that in the 80s, when I got divorced and moved to Connecticut with my two boys, they were 4 years old and 18 months old. I wasn't the first one that someone would want to rent a house to. In the meantime, they'd come back begging me because that little family, mommy, daddy, 2 kids and a dog, well, it turns out they didn't have credit. So they'd come back begging me. But then again, they'd go to my boss, a male, to make sure that I was good, talk to me about, her reputation or her, how she is as a person.
Right.
It's just, we need to continue telling the stories. So I have one last question for you.
Okay.
If you could say wait, I can ask more. If you could say one thing to your mother's generation and one to the next about how women can truly support one another, what would it be?
Knock on someone's door and ask how they are. If you're going to make the cake, bring it over and say, can we sit down and just have a talk for an hour? And can we talk, how are you? Have real conversations about real things and talk about what your dreams are. Because, the thing is that if you don't put it out there as something that you want, it's not going to happen. I mean, and, I'll talk to, I have young women, young men who want to talk to me about making art and about making photographs and just, about pursuing this course. And my own son, who's a painter. We will talk about like projects that he's working on. But one of the things that I'll always say is that if you don't choose this thing, if you don't put it out there, that you take this piece and you say, I want this down the road. This is where I want to go. I have this spark of an idea and I want it to be an exhibition, or I want it to be a photo series, or I want it to be a book, a novel. If you don't put it out there, it's not going to happen. You've got to put it out there and say that you want it. And you have to believe in it, because if you don't believe in your own work, nobody else will believe in it. So it all begins with knocking on a door. And I really wish that my mother had done that more. And not to go on a whole tangent here, but one of the things that I've been working on this novel. And the novel is based on my own childhood, and it's taking one story from Cherry Hill and expanding it into a whole book. And it's fiction. I mean, it's based on my life, but I have fictionalized many things in it. And one of the things that I realized is how much I wish my mother could just have said what she wanted, that she could have talked about having her own dreams, and that somebody could have listened. That someone could have been there to say, you know what, you want to open a bakery? You should open a bakery. Think about it. How do you, because if you set that goal, when you start to talk about it, other people will contribute and say, well, this is how you can do it. I know so-and-so, and she does this, and she does graphic design, and she could do your labels, and she could do this, and have you thought about talking to her? You find your community by knocking on a door. And I just wish she had done that. And one of the things that I write about in the book is that there's a character not dissimilar to my brother who is bipolar. And that we were told to not talk about it, that it was just a family thing, keep it in the family, don't talk about it. And I realized writing that we didn't even talk about it with the church. And the church is the place that you're supposed to find solace. And so what good was the church if you have to show up there and be as prim and proper as you do when you're, in your front lawn and cutting the grass, and, where are those conversations? And I guess that makes me angry, because I think we would all be better if we were knocking on the doors and having a conversation and just saying, how are you?
Okay, so you mentioned what you're writing, and I want you to tell me what Cole Kasdan said to you, the conversation you had with her about this new novel.
Well, Cole is the author of What's Eating Us, and she's an incredible writer. She's a good friend, and she's read a couple of drafts of this novel, and she said to me, "You have written a young adult novel for women over 40." And I love that. I love that. She was like, it's a YA novel for women over 40. And I was like, okay, that's the pitch line.
Jona, we have so much more to talk about. Before I forget, where can people find out more? What is your website?
It's just jonafrank.com, and Jona is spelled Jona.
I want to continue this conversation because I think there's so much more that we need to talk about. And I thank you so much for joining me again.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to think about all of these things. And hopefully things move forward with my novel, and I'll come back when the novel's published.
Jona, thank you. After my conversation with Jona Frank, Molly listened, and we sat down to talk about what her story stirred for both of us. Jona's work always reminds me that the images we choose, or the ones we reject, say as much about us as the ones others take.
Yeah, and then every generations is editing its own version of womanhood. What stood out to me was her idea of authorship. Who gets to frame the story? For our generation, my generation, that question feels really personal. We grew up with the first digital mirrors like MySpace, if anyone remembers that, Facebook, Instagram, and we've spent years learning how to be both the subject and the storyteller. I think there's power in that, but also a lot of exhaustion.
Yes, there is, especially because there's so much you're supposed to do. I grew up with TV shows like Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best and all of those movies where you're supposed to look and act a certain way. So those pictures are kind of burned in, in my brain as to what the typical woman was supposed to look like, what society told us. And that's one of the things that Jonah does. She breaks it down, which I thought was absolutely wonderful. That's what draws me to her.
Yeah, a lot of melding between what sometimes we think as different pieces of the journey, but kind of adding that transitional space in between. So we don't see ourselves as different, like classifications as a boomer or a millennial or a Gen Z. It kind of helps us collaborate in a more natural way, I think. Like each generation of women uses storytelling to define itself differently. For me, it's almost for millennials, it's almost like the opposite challenge, right? Like being seen constantly and trying to make that visibility mean something real and vulnerable and honest and true.
I know what you mean. And visibility back in my day as a baby boomer was not what it is for you. It was going out in public. And that was the only visibility you really had. You didn't have TikTok, you didn't have social media, you didn't have all of the, whether they're tools, good or bad, that's not something that we had. And Jonah just brings it all together. She takes us back to her mother's generation and integrates the interpretation and how she really rebelled against that. That wasn't who she was. So we just talked about that. Each generation uses art or storytelling to define itself. Um, I'd like to talk about how much vulnerability is too much when women tell their own stories. What do you think as being a millennial?
I think the question matters too much anymore because the younger generations don't, at least in my experience, the vulnerability is just a piece of our everyday life. There's no way to exist in the online and digital world, which we are pretty much required to be if you want to have any success in a field. Even if it's not social media, it's LinkedIn. Like you have to be somewhere if you want any sort of success that has to do with a little bit of a public life. So maybe what matters is intent, like whether the image is a mirror or a mask. As women storytellers, I think we hold both the burden and the gift of shaping the visual language that future generations are going to inherit. I think there's a millennial tension between performance and honesty. We've been trained to be authentic, but then authenticity itself became kind of a brand. If you think about a lot of the content creators that have gotten like multi-million dollar podcast deals and books, it's kind of that, it's kind of like a rebranding of the girl power sort of authenticity. But I like that Jonah's work pushes against that. Her portraits really make space for the awkwardness, for the contradiction, for the unflattering truths and parts of who we are.
Which is very important because if we don't look at the unflattering truths, then what are we looking at? We're only looking at pieces and we're basically hiding behind a mask. And again, that's why I think storytelling is so important and the visual pieces. make a huge difference, because then you can also not only listen to or read the story, but you could also make up your own story by the visual.
Yeah, and the reinvention through Jona's work, it seems like it used to be seen as kind of like a vanity project, like everyone needs to look at me, right? I think it's more about agency. Like maybe that's the millennial and Gen Z evolution of womanhood as like a broader scope that includes our trans sisters and our non-binary folks who are trying to find identity and belonging in the world, learning that like this freedom to reimagine yourself over and over, it's not flighty or superficial, like it's creative, it's courageous, and it's very deeply human. And I really appreciated that kind of paradigm shift with Jona.
Well, Jonah reminds us that reinvention isn't vanity, as you just said, it's agency. Perfect. Every time a woman tells her story in her own light, she expands the frame for all of us. That's it for this episode of The Women's Current, Is the Tide Turning?
If this conversation sparks something in you, we want to hear from you. What's this week's current moment? Tell us on Instagram @TheWomen'sCurrent. Share it with a friend. And don't forget to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube.
Join us each week as we explore how women are supporting each other, and where do we go from here?
Until next time, I'm Molly Wadzeck.
And I'm Sylvia Beckerman. Thanks for listening. This has been a Life of Prey production.